The air in the lower pits of Onyx Reach smelled like oxidized copper and the sour, lingering tang of recycled oxygen that had passed through too many desperate lungs. It was a place where light went to die, filtered through layers of grime and the flickering neon of cheap advertisements for synthetic stimulants. Kalen Voss adjusted the collar of his weathered flight jacket, feeling the familiar weight of his data-shunting deck against his hip. He was not supposed to be here. He had a delivery to make in the upper spire, a clean transaction involving encrypted mining rights that would have netted him enough credits to finally stop breathing this metallic soup. But the shortcut through the bioasset exchange had been a mistake. Or perhaps, as he would later tell himself, it was the only honest thing he had done in a decade. The exchange was a series of reinforced titanium cages arranged in a semicircle, illuminated by harsh overhead floodlights that stripped away any semblance of dignity from those within. Buyers moved like shadows, their faces obscured by filtration masks or the darkness of their hoods. They poked at flesh with electric prods, checked dental implants, and discussed genetic purity as if they were browsing for spare ship parts. Kalen walked with his head down, his boots clucking against the metal grating. He told himself to keep moving. The galaxy was full of holes, and Onyx Reach was one of the deepest. You did not survive the outer rim by looking for people to save. You survived by being invisible. He had almost cleared the final row when he saw her. The cage was double reinforced, the bars humming with a low-frequency neural deterrent field. Inside stood a creature that the propaganda vids called a monster. She was a draconite, a bioengineered titan designed for the frontline trenches of the helium wars. She stood over 2 meters tall, her skin a deep bruised emerald, etched with the jagged white lines of old surgical scars and combat wounds. Her shoulders were broad enough to carry the weight of a world, yet she was hunched, restricted by a neural shackle that pulsed with a rhythmic, sickly violet light at the base of her skull. Her hair was a mane of obsidian wire, matted and filthy, framing a face that was a masterpiece of brutal symmetry. But it was her eyes that stopped Kalen mid-stride. They were not the glazed, defeated eyes of a broken asset. They were 2 burning embers of molten gold, fixed on a point in the far distance, as if she were looking through the metal walls of the station and into the cold, clean heart of the stars. "Checking the inventory, are we?" The voice was like a serrated blade dragged across gravel. Kalen turned to see Malachor, the sector's most notorious flesh peddler. He was a man composed mostly of cybernetic replacements and bad intentions, his breathing assisted by a clicking apparatus on his chest. "Just passing through, Malachor," Kalen replied, his voice steady despite the sudden spike in his pulse. Malachor chuckled, a sound like dry leaves caught in a turbine. "A bit high-end for a data runner, isn't she? This is a V3 model, top-of-the-line Gentech craftsmanship. She's killed 12 men with her bare hands and twice as many with whatever she could find on the floor. Stubborn as a solar flare, though. We've had to cycle her neural dampeners to the maximum just to keep her from ripping the doors off." Kalen looked back at the Draconite. She had not moved. She didn't even acknowledge their presence. She was a statue of green marble, waiting for the end of the world. "What's the tag?" Kalen heard himself ask. The words felt like they belonged to someone else, someone much braver or much stupider than the man he had spent years becoming. Malachor's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Kalen. "For you? 80,000 credits, and that's a steal. The Gentech enforcers are coming to pick up the unsold scrap by dawn to ship them to the orbital processors for component recovery. If you want her as a whole unit, you pay now. 80,000. It was every credit Kalen had saved for his retirement on the verdant plains of Elysia. It was the price of his freedom, his quiet life, his chance to finally stop running. He looked at the Draconite again. A drop of sweat rolled down her temple, carving a path through the grime. The violet light on her shackle flared, and he saw a microscopic flinch in her jaw. She was in agony, a constant silent scream being pumped directly into her brain. Yet she stood as if she were on a parade ground. Kalen thought about the reports he'd filed years ago, the logistics of bioweapon disposal he had authorized with a flick of his stylus. He thought about the man he wanted to be when he looked in a mirror that wasn't cracked. "She has a name?" Kalen asked. Malachor spat on the floor. "It's an asset, Voss. It has a serial number. Tala V3. Call it whatever you want before you break it. I'll take her, Kalen said, reaching for his credit transponder. Full ownership transfer. No corporate leashes, no backdoor overrides. I want the master key for that shackle, and I want the legal bill of sale purged from the public registry. Malakor's grin was a canyon of yellow teeth. You're either the saint of the Reach or the biggest mark I've ever seen. Either way, your credits spend the same. 20 minutes later, the transaction was complete. The neural field dropped with a dying whine. The cage door slid open, sounding like a funeral bell. Kalen stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The Draconite, Tala, finally turned her head. The intensity of her golden gaze was a physical weight. Tala, Kalen said softly. The name felt strange in his mouth. My name is Kalen. I've bought your contract. She didn't move. Her voice, when it finally came, was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in Kalen's very bones. Another owner, she said. Another cage. Just a different shape. I'm taking you to my ship, Kalen said, trying to ignore the way his hands were shaking. We're leaving Onyx Reach. She looked at him with a weary, ancient skepticism. They always say that before the testing begins. She moved then, stepping out of the cage with a predatory grace that even the neural shackle couldn't suppress. She was a storm wrapped in emerald skin, and as she walked past him, Kalen realized he hadn't just bought a slave. He had bought a revolution. The walk to Hangar Bay 42 was a gauntlet of stairs. In the lawless corridors of Onyx Reach, a scrawny human data runner leading a 7-foot Draconite warrior was like a flickering candle in a room full of moths. Kalen kept his hand near his holster, his eyes scanning the shadows. He could feel the heat radiating from Tala, a palpable aura of suppressed violence and exhaustion. She didn't run, didn't attempt to strike him. She simply followed, her footsteps silent despite her mass, her gaze fixed on the back of his head, as if she were calculating exactly how many seconds it would take to snap his neck if the shackle failed. They reached the Obsidian Streak, a modified core-class freighter that looked like it had been held together by prayer and stolen spare parts. It wasn't much, but it was fast, and it was home. Get inside, Kalen muttered, punching the entry code into the ramp's keypad. Tala paused at the base of the ramp, her nostrils flaring as she caught the scent of old engine oil and ozone. She looked at the ship, then back at the sprawling, filthy station they were leaving behind. This craft is unregistered, she observed. It's discreet, Kalen corrected. Now move. The station security won't take long to realize Malachor sold a Gentech asset without their cut. The interior of the Streak was cramped, filled with crates of encrypted drives and spare circuitry. Kalen led her to the small common area, which consisted of a bolted-down table and 2 narrow benches. Sit, Kalen commanded, then immediately winced at the tone. I mean, please sit. You look like you're about to collapse. Tala didn't sit. She moved to the corner of the room, her back against the bulkhead, her eyes never leaving him. The violet light on her neck was still pulsing, a constant reminder of her status. You have the master key, she said. It was a statement, not a question. Kalen pulled a small, silver cylinder from his pocket, the ion pulse key. It was the only thing that could deactivate the neural shackle without cooking her brain. I do, he said. Why haven't you used it? Because we're still within range of the station's override broadcast, Kalen lied. He was terrified. If he turned off the shackle now, what was to stop her from killing him and taking the ship? He was a smuggler, not a hero. He knew how the world worked. She gave a short, harsh sound that might have been a laugh. You're afraid. You bought a weapon and now you're worried it might go off in your hands. I bought a person, Kalen snapped, his frustration boiling over. I spent every credit I have to keep you from being turned into a pile of scrap and raw minerals. So yeah, maybe I'm a little tense. Tala leaned her head back against the cold metal. Her golden eyes dimmed slightly. You spent 80,000 credits for a person you don't know? In this sector, that makes you a fool, Kalen Voss. Or a liar. Maybe I'm both, he muttered, turning to the pilot's console. He initiated the pre-flight sequence, his fingers dancing across the haptic interface. The engines of the Streak groaned to life, a deep vibration that shook the deck plating. He contacted the docking tower, used a forged clearance code, and felt the magnetic grapples release with a heavy thud. As the ship cleared the atmospheric shield of Onyx Reach and punched into the silent, velvet blackness of the void, Kalen felt a momentary sense of relief, but it was short-lived. Behind them, the station was a cluster of jagged lights, a hornet's nest he had just poked. He set the coordinates for the outer rim, a sector of dead space where the stars were sparse and the law was non-existent. Only then did he stand up and walk back to the common area. Tala was still in the corner, but she had slumped slightly. The toll of the neural dampeners was becoming obvious. Her breathing was shallow, and her green skin had taken on a gray, sickly hue. Kalen held up the ion pulse key. "We're out of range now." She watched him, her body tensing instinctively. "Do it then. Finish the transition." "I'm not transitioning anything," Kalen said. He stepped forward, his heart thumping in his ears. He reached out, his hand trembling, as he brought the key toward the violet light at the base of her skull. For a second he was close enough to smell her, a mix of metallic dust, old sweat, and something surprisingly sweet, like crushed pine needles. He pressed the key against the shackle's interface and twisted. There was a sharp electronic chirp, followed by a hiss of escaping gas. The violet light flickered and died. The heavy metal collar snapped open and fell to the floor with a loud clang. Tala gasped, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. She collapsed to her knees, her hands clutching her head. Her entire body began to shudder, great convulsive tremors that rattled her frame. "Tala?" Kalen knelt beside her, reaching out but afraid to touch. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer for a long minute. She just breathed, deep, ragged gulps of air, as if she were tasting oxygen for the first time in her life. When she finally looked up, the golden fire in her eyes was terrifyingly bright. She reached up, touching the raw, scarred skin of her neck where the shackle had been. "The noise," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's gone." The screaming in my head. "It's silent." Kalen let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "That's the point of a key, Tala." She looked at him then, and for the first time, she wasn't looking at an owner. She was looking at a man, a small, fragile human who had just handed her the power to destroy him. She surged forward with blinding speed, her large hand wrapping around Kalen's throat. She didn't squeeze, but the threat was unmistakable. He could feel the immense strength in her fingers, the hard ridges of her carbon-weave skin. "Why?" she growled, her face inches from his. "Why would you give a monster its teeth back?" Kalen didn't struggle. He looked her straight in the eyes, his voice thin but resolute. "Because I'm tired of seeing monsters in the mirrors of every station I visit, and because I think you're the only one in this ship who isn't a monster." Tala stared at him, searching his face for a lie, for a trick, for the hidden catch that always came with human kindness. She saw only a tired man who had gambled his life on a feeling. Slowly, she released his throat. She sat back on her heels, her massive shoulders rising and falling with her breath. "You are a very strange human, Kalen Voss," she said, her voice dropping to a low rumble. "Get used to it," he said, rubbing his neck. "We've got a long way to go, and I'm pretty sure half the galaxy is going to be looking for us by tomorrow morning." Tala looked toward the viewport, where the stars were stretching into long ribbons of light as the ship engaged its jump drive. "Then we should prepare," she said, and for the first time her voice sounded like that of a soldier again. "Not a slave, but a warrior. Because if Gentech wants me back, they're going to have to burn the void to find me." Kalen nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. "Then let's give them a fire they'll never forget." He walked back to the cockpit, leaving her alone with her silence and her newfound weight of freedom. He had no credits, no plan, and a 7-foot bioengineered weapon in his kitchen. For the first time in years, Kalen Voss felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The jump into hyperspace usually felt like a gentle tug at the base of the skull, a momentary displacement of reality that Kalen Voss had long ago grown accustomed to. But today, with a 7-foot bioengineered warrior sitting in his galley, the transition felt like a plummet into an abyss. The obsidian streak hummed with the rhythmic vibration of the fold drive, a low-frequency thrum that echoed the tension in Kalen's own chest. He remained at the pilot's console for 3 hours, staring at the swirling kaleidoscope of blue and white through the viewport, waiting for the inevitable sound of a neck snapping or the hiss of a depressurizing airlock. Neither came. When he finally worked up the nerve to return to the common area, he found Tala exactly where he had left her. She hadn't touched the emergency rations he'd set out, nor had she moved to the bunk he'd offered. She was standing by the small circular window, staring at the hyperspace lanes with an intensity that seemed almost religious. Her green skin was still pale, and the scars on her arms stood out like ivory inlay against dark jade. "You should eat something," Kalen said, leaning against the doorway. "It's mostly synthetic protein and repurposed algae, but it'll keep your systems from crashing." Tala didn't turn around. "Why did you buy me?" Kalen sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We've been over this, Tala. I'm a fool with too many credits and a bleeding heart." She turned then, her golden eyes narrowing. "Do not lie to me, data runner. Nobody spends 80,000 credits on a whim. Not in the Reach. Not someone like you who counts every spark and scrapes by on low-priority deliveries. You saw something. Or you wanted something." Kalen walked over to the table and sat down, his movements slow and deliberate. He wanted to tell her he was a hero. He wanted to believe it himself. But the weight of his past, the ghosts of the helium wars, wouldn't allow for such an easy lie. "I was a logistics officer for the Synaptic Union 12 years ago," he said softly. "I was the one who signed the requisition forms for the first batch of V1 units. I didn't see you as people back then. I saw you as high-density armor plating with a pulse. I saw the casualty reports and thought about the cost of replacement parts, not the loss of lives." Tala's expression didn't change, but her hand drifted to the spot on her neck where the shackle had been. "And now? You think buying one of us wipes the slate clean? You think one saved life pays for 10,000 lost?" "No," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It doesn't pay for anything. It's just, it was the first time in a long time I had the choice to not look away. I saw you standing there, and I realized that if I walked past that cage, I'd be dead. Not physically, but the version of me that still mattered would be gone forever." Tala watched him for a long moment, her predatory stillness slowly softening into something more human, something more vulnerable. She finally sat down on the bench opposite him, her massive frame making the furniture look like a child's toy. "I have spent 6 years in the dark," she said. "I have been owned by 4 different men. The first wanted a gladiator, the second wanted a servant, the third wanted a pet, the fourth just wanted to break something beautiful. Not one of them ever asked me a question. Not one of them ever looked at me and saw anything other than a weapon." She reached for a nutrient bar, her large fingers unwrapping the foil with surprising delicacy. She took a bite, chewed slowly, and then looked at Kalen again. "There is something you should know, Kalen Voss. Something Malachor didn't tell you. Something even I didn't fully understand until the shackle was gone." Kalen felt a cold prickle of apprehension. "What is it?" "I am not a standard V3 model," she said. "The Gen-Tech scientists, they didn't just want a better soldier. They wanted a failsafe, a way to ensure that if the Draconite units ever turned against their masters, the entire network could be neutralized instantly. They called it the Omega Protocol." Kalen's eyes widened. He was a data runner. He knew the value of a master override. That's a legend. Every corporation claims they have a kill switch for their bioassets. It's just theater to keep the investors happy. "It is not theater," Tala replied. She leaned forward, the shadows of the galley playing across the sharp angles of her face. "I can feel it. Now that the neural dampeners are off, there is a partition in my mind, a vault of encrypted data that I cannot open, but I can feel it humming. It's linked to my primary motor cortex." Kalen stood up, his mind already racing through the implications. "If you have the Omega code, Anum, you're not just a runaway slave. You're a walking extinction event for every Draconite in the galaxy. Gen-Tech wouldn't just be annoyed about losing 80,000 credits. They'd burn an entire system to get you back." "I think they are already burning," she said. Kalen moved to the diagnostic suite in the corner of the room. It was a refurbished medical scanner he used to check for tracking bugs in the high-value data drives he transported. "Let me scan you," he said. "Not as an owner, As a technician, if there's a partition in your head, we need to know what it's doing. We need to know if it's broadcasting a signal. Tala hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the door. The instinct to resist, to fight against any further intrusion into her body, was clearly battling with the logic of their situation. Slowly, she stood up and walked toward the scanner. "Do not probe where you do not belong," she warned, her voice thick with a dark guttural edge. "I'm just checking the frequencies, Tala." "I'm not going inside," Kalen promised. He activated the scanner. A halo of soft green light began to orbit Tala's head, mapped against a three-dimensional wireframe of her skull on the monitor. Kalen's fingers flew across the keyboard, filtering out the noise of her biological systems. He searched for the signature of a quantum-encrypted partition. "There," he whispered. On the screen, deep within the folds of her synthetic parietal lobe, was a cluster of data so dense it appeared as a black hole on the scan. It was a beautiful, terrifying piece of code, woven into her very neurons. But as he looked closer, he saw something that made his blood run cold. "Tala, this isn't just a vault," he said, his voice trembling. "It's a transceiver. It's dormant for now, but it's designed to activate if it detects a specific high-frequency ping. A Gentek search signal. Can you remove it?" she asked. Kalen looked at the delicate intersection of silicon and brain tissue. "If I even touch this with a surgical laser, your brain would turn to mush in 3 seconds. It's hardwired into your life support functions." "So I am still a slave," she said, her voice hollow, "even without the chains." Kalen turned away from the monitor, looking at her. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't a weapon. She was a woman who had been turned into a bomb without her consent. The injustice of it hit him like a physical blow. He thought of the billions of credits Gentek made every year, built on the backs of people like Tala, people who were manufactured, branded, and then fitted with suicide switches. "No," Kalen said firmly, "you are not a slave. You are a secret, and secrets can be buried. I know a place, a deep space relay station in the Scylla Belt. It's run by an old friend, a man who doesn't ask questions if the credits are right. He has a signal dampening field that can mask a supernova. If we can get there, we can buy ourselves some time to figure out how to crack this code." "You would risk your ship for this?" Tala asked. "You would risk your life for a secret you didn't even know you were buying?" Kalen looked at the ion pulse key sitting on the table. "I already made my choice in the Reach, Tala. I'm just following through." A sudden, sharp alarm blared from the cockpit, a high-pitched screaming that signaled a proximity alert. Kalen bolted for the pilot's seat, his heart hammering. "Talk to me, Streak," he shouted, slamming his hands onto the controls. The hyperspace tunnel was beginning to fray at the edges, the blue light turning a sickly, fractured purple. The ship shuddered violently, throwing Tala against the bulkhead. "We're being pulled out," Kalen yelled. "Someone just dropped an interdiction mine in the lane." "Hold on," he roared as the obsidian streak was ripped back into real space with a bone-jarring jolt. The stars snapped back into focus, bright and uncaring, and directly in front of them, silhouetted against the glowing dust of a nearby nebula, was a ship that looked like a jagged shard of obsidian. It was a Voidstalker-class interceptor, sleek, silent, and deadly. Kalen's hands froze on the controls. It wasn't station security. It wasn't a pirate. It was Vaxin Draken, the Collector. He didn't waste time with a hail. The interceptor's forward cannons flared with a brilliant white light. "Evasive maneuvers," Kalen screamed, slamming the streak into a vertical roll as a bolt of plasma tore through the space where they had been a heartbeat before. The hunt had begun. The Scylla asteroid belt was a graveyard of ancient planetoids and shattered moons, a chaotic expanse of rock and ice that stretched for over 10 million kilometers. It was the only place Kalen could think of that offered even a ghost of a chance. The obsidian streak dived into the debris field, its hull groaning under the strain of high-G maneuvers as Kalen wove between house-sized boulders. Behind them, the Voidstalker followed with terrifying ease. It moved like a shark through water, its advanced inertial dampeners allowing it to make turns that would have crushed a human pilot into a red smear. "He's ghosting us!" Kalen shouted over the roar of the venting coolant. "I can't shake him on speed alone." Tala had crawled into the co-pilot's seat, her large hands gripping the armrest so hard the synthetic leather was beginning to tear. Her face was set in a mask of cold, tactical focus. "His engine signature is high frequency," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "He is using a gravimetric drive. He isn't following your heat trail. He's following the distortion your ship makes in the local gravity field." "How do I stop that?" Kalen asked, throwing the ship into a sharp bank to avoid a tumbling slab of iron. "You don't stop it," she replied. "You overload it. We need more mass. We need to go deeper into the belt, where the rocks are thick enough to create a gravity storm." Kalen looked at his sensors. "If we go any deeper, the debris will tear the streak apart." "This ship wasn't built for a demolition derby, Tala." "Then let me take the guns," she said. Kalen blinked. "You can fly a weapon system? I was designed to operate every piece of hardware the Union ever manufactured, Kalen. I can hit a coin at 5 kilometers while falling through an atmosphere. Just give me the link." Kalen didn't hesitate. He flipped a switch on the console, transferring the tactical HUD to the co-pilot's display. A secondary targeting reticle appeared in front of Tala, glowing a fierce orange. "You're hot," he said. "Don't waste the juice. We're low on power as it is." "I do not miss," she said simply. She grabbed the manual override sticks, her fingers moving with a fluid, terrifying precision. The streak's twin laser turrets rotated, tracking the Voidstalker as it emerged from behind a massive asteroid. The interceptor fired again, a volley of blue pulse fire that clipped the streak's rear shields. The cabin lights flickered, and the artificial gravity wavered for a second, making Kalen's stomach flip. "Shields at 40%, he yelled. "We can't take another hit like that." Tala didn't respond. She was waiting, her eyes fixed on the scanner. She watched as the Voidstalker adjusted its trajectory, preparing for a killing blow. "Now," she whispered. She pulled the triggers, but she didn't fire at the interceptor. She fired at a cluster of unstable, ice-covered asteroids directly above the enemy ship. The laser beams punched into the frozen rock, causing the pockets of trapped gas inside to expand and detonate. The asteroids shattered into a million jagged fragments, creating a localized cloud of shrapnel that slammed into the Voidstalker's forward shields. The enemy ship rocked, its momentum momentarily disrupted. "Nice shooting!" Kalen shouted, pushing the engines to the red line. "It was a distraction," she said. "He is already recalculating." Kalen steered the streak into a narrow canyon formed by two massive, slow-rotating planetoids. The walls of the canyon were barely wider than the ship's wingspan. He could hear the scream of metal as the wingtips scraped against the jagged rock. "If we don't lose him in the next 3 minutes, we're vapor," Kalen muttered, his sweat stinging his eyes. "He's gaining," Tala said, her eyes locked on the rear-view sensors. "He's ignored the debris. He's coming straight through." Kalen looked at the navigation map. There was a jump point at the edge of the belt, but they'd never reach it at this rate. He needed a miracle. Or he needed to be as brave as the woman sitting next to him. "Tala," he said, his voice tight. "There's an old freighter trick. We vent the drive core's coolant into the exhaust. It creates a massive cloud of superheated gas. For 5 seconds, we'll be invisible to his sensors. But it also means our engines will lock up. We'll be drifting." "And then?" she asked. "And then we hope he sails right past us, and we have enough momentum to coast into the shadow of that moonlet over there. It is a high-risk maneuver," she observed. "If he doesn't miss, we are sitting ducks. You got a better idea?" Tala looked at him, and for a fleeting second, he saw a glimmer of respect in her golden eyes. "Do it, data runner." Kalen grabbed the emergency vent lever. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. He slammed the lever forward. A deafening roar filled the cabin as the streak's cooling system purged itself. A massive white plume of gas erupted from the rear of the ship, expanding into a dense fog that swallowed them whole. The engines died with a mournful whine, and the ship fell silent, drifting through the void like a piece of dead rock. Kalen held his breath. He watched the scanner, which was now a useless wall of white noise. He could hear the rhythmic thud of his own heart, echoing in the silence of the cabin. Through the fog, a shape emerged. The Voidstalker soared past them, its engines glowing with a fierce, angry light. It was moving too fast to stop, its sensors blinded by the coolant cloud. It vanished into the asteroid field, searching for a ghost. We ghosted him, Kalen whispered, his hands shaking so hard he had to grip his knees. We actually ghosted him. Tala exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to carry years of tension with it. She slumped back into her seat, the orange HUD reflecting in her eyes. He will be back, she said. Vaxin Draken does not quit. He is a hunter by nature, not by trade. Then we'd better make sure we're long gone before he figures out the trick, Kalen said. He began the arduous process of restarting the engines. It was a delicate dance of bypassing safety protocols and manually re-engaging the fuel injectors. Slowly, one by one, the ship's systems flickered back to life. As the obsidian streak limped toward the shadow of the nearby moonlet, Kalen looked over at Tala. She was staring at her hands, her fingers flexing, as if she were still feeling the weight of the weapon controls. You saved us back there, he said. We saved each other, she replied. Kalen looked out at the vast, uncaring expanse of the Scylla belt. He thought about the 60,000 credits he didn't have, the retirement he'd traded away, and the hunter who was currently searching for them in the dark. He should have felt regret. He should have been terrified. But as he looked at Tala, he realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't running away from something. He was running towards something. How are your levels? He asked, trying to sound professional. Any pain from the scan? Tala turned to him, and her smile was a small, sharp thing, like a shard of glass. My levels are optimal, Kalen Voss, and for the first time in 6 years, I do not feel any pain at all. Kalen nodded, turning back to the controls. We'll reach the relay station in 5 hours. We'll get some real food, some fuel, and then we'll figure out how to crack that Omega code. Together. Together, she repeated. The words seemed to hang in the air, a new kind of gravity that was stronger than anything the Scylla belt could throw at them. Behind them, the void remained silent, but Kalen knew the hunter was still out there, and he knew that the next time they met, tricks wouldn't be enough. They would have to fight, and he was starting to think that with Tala by his side, he might actually be a warrior after all. The obsidian streak vanished into the shadow of the moon, a small, stubborn light in a galaxy that was trying its best to put it out. As they drifted in the silence, Kalen found himself thinking about the nature of a weapon. A sword didn't choose to strike, a gun didn't choose to fire, but Tala had chosen to save him. She had chosen to fight for a man who had once seen her as nothing more than a casualty report. Is that what freedom is? He wondered. The ability to choose who you fight for? He didn't have the answer yet, but as he watched the stars through the cracked viewport, he knew he was willing to spend the rest of his life looking for it. The journey was just beginning, and the road to the outer rim was paved with more than just asteroids. It was paved with the choices they would have to make, the lives they would have to save, and the monsters they would have to face, both in the void and within themselves. Kalen closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the steady, rhythmic breathing of the woman in the seat next to him. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. 5 hours, he whispered to the empty cockpit. Just 5 more hours. But in the silence of space, 5 hours could feel like a lifetime. And in a lifetime, anything could happen. The streak moved deeper into the shadows, a tiny speck of defiance in a universe of grand designs. Kalen Voss was no longer just a data runner. He was a man with a purpose, and Tala was no longer just a draconite. She was a soul in transition. Together, they were the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, a hope that wouldn't die. As the ship's internal clock ticked over to the 4th hour of their flight, Kalen finally allowed himself to sleep, his head resting against the cold glass of the console. He dreamed of green fields and golden eyes, of a world where cages didn't exist and every warrior could finally lay down their arms. It was a beautiful dream, and for the first time in 34 years, Kalen Voss believed it might actually come true. But deep in the asteroid belt, a black ship was already turning around, its gravimetric sensors picking up a faint, lingering trail of superheated coolant. Vaxin Draken was a patient man, and he knew exactly where the ghost was going. The hunt was not over. It was only just beginning. The Scylla relay station was less of a spaceport and more of a mechanical parasite, clinging to the jagged side of a massive, carbon-rich asteroid. As the obsidian streak drifted into the station's gravitational well, Kalen Voss felt the familiar shiver of the docking clamps locking onto the hull. It was a violent metallic embrace that echoed through the ship's skeleton. This place was a hollowed-out tomb of old industry, illuminated by flickering orange sodium lamps that cast long, distorted shadows across the landing bays. It smelled of recycled sweat, stale oxygen, and the sharp ozone tang of high-voltage welding. "Stay close and keep your hood up," Kalen muttered, checking the charge on his kinetic pistol. "Most of the folks here are just trying to outrun their pass, but there are always a few bottom feeders looking for a quick score." Tala adjusted the oversized, grease-stained poncho Kalen had found in the cargo hold. Even with the fabric draped over her massive shoulders, her 7-foot height was impossible to fully mask. She looked like a mountain trying to hide behind a sapling. "I do not like this place, Kalen," she whispered. "The air feels heavy. Not with gravity, but with hunger." "That's just the Scylla charm," he replied, forcing a lightness he didn't feel. "It's the last stop before the void. Nobody comes here because they have options." They stepped off the ramp and were immediately hit by the cacophony of the station. Automated drones whirred overhead like oversized insects, and the distant sound of heavy machinery thrummed through the floor plating. They navigated through the crowded gantries, passing miners with skin stained gray by lunar dust and freighter pilots arguing over fuel prices. Kalen kept his eyes forward, but he could feel the weight of a dozen different gazes landing on them. A Draconite, even a disguised one, moved with a lethal economy of motion that drew the eye of anyone who had survived the frontier. They reached a reinforced blast door at the end of a dimly lit corridor. Kalen punched a complex sequence into the keypad and waited. A small camera lens slid out from the wall, whirring as it scanned his retinas. "Voss?" A voice crackled through the intercom, sounding like a handful of gravel in a blender. "You're 3 years late for that drink you owe me, you void-blasted maggot." "Open the door, Silas," Kalen said, leaning into the mic. "I've got a situation that needs your specific brand of illegal expertise." The locks disengaged with a series of heavy thuds, and the door hissed open. Silas was a man who looked like he had been assembled from spare parts. One of his arms was a high-torque industrial prosthetic, and his left eye had been replaced by a glowing red optical sensor that whirred as it focused. He stood barely 5 feet tall, but he carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew exactly how to dismantle a starship with a screwdriver. Silas glanced at Kalen, then his optical sensor zoomed in on the hulking figure behind him. He let out a long, low whistle. "A V3? Are you trying to get us all spaced, Voss?" "Gentech would glass this whole rock just to get a fingerprint off her." "She's not an asset, Silas." "She's a friend," Kalen said, his voice firming, "and she's got something in her head that's making her a beacon. We need to go dark. Now." Silas grunted, stepping aside to let them enter. His workshop was a chaotic cathedral of technology. Defunct droids hung from the ceiling like mechanical bats, and every surface was covered in soldering irons, circuit boards, and jars of coolant. He slammed the door shut and engaged the signal-dampening field. A low, invisible hum settled over the room, the kind of silence that made your ears pop. "The dampener is at full strength," Silas said, wiping his oily hands on a rag. "We're invisible to anything short of a military-grade deep space scan. Now get her on the table. Let's see what kind of mess you've brought into my house." Tala hesitated, her golden eyes scanning the room. She looked at the tools, the disassembled machines, and the cold metal of the diagnostic table. To her, this wasn't a doctor's office. It was a repair shop for things, not people. "It is okay, Tala," Kalen said, placing a hand on her arm. "Silas is a gearhead, but he's the best there is. He doesn't care about corporate protocols or ownership papers. He only cares about the math." Tala slowly climbed onto the table, the reinforced legs groaning under her weight. Silas swung a massive holographic projector over her, and a translucent blue map of her internal systems flickered into existence. "By the stars," Silas whispered, his red eye spinning rapidly. "Look at the density of that neural weave. It's not just programming, it's a god-blasted architecture." He zoomed in on the dark cluster in her parietal lobe. Kalen watched the map, his heart sinking. Up close, the Omega code looked less like a file and more like a parasite, its digital tendrils wrapped tightly around the nodes that controlled her speech, her memory, and her heart rate. It's a dual-function trigger, Silas explained, pointing to a pulsating red vein in the hologram. One signal makes her a beacon, broadcasting her coordinates to any Gentech receiver within 10 light-years. The other signal is a terminal override. It tells her heart to stop beating and her brain to short-circuit. "Can you cut it out?" Kalen asked, the words feeling like lead in his mouth. Silas turned to him, his expression grim. "It's hardwired into her primary life support. If I try to snip this thread, the whole tapestry unravels. It's designed to be permanent, Voss. The only way to stop the signal without killing her is to find the original encryption key, and those are kept in a vault at Gentech Prime, guarded by more security than a planetary treasury." Tala sat up, her face a mask of cold fury. "So I am still a bomb," she said. "I am free of the cage, but the fuse is still burning." Kalen looked at her, and for the first time, he felt the true weight of his ignorance. He had thought that buying her freedom was a single act of courage, a one-time transaction that wiped away his sins. But freedom wasn't a gift you gave someone. It was a battle you fought every single day. "We'll find the key," Kalen said, though he had no idea how. "You're a dreamer, Voss," Silas said, shaking his head. "But dreamers don't survive the Reach. You need to get her off station. Vaxin Draken isn't the only one who can track a high-frequency ping. If he doesn't find you, someone else will." Kalen opened his mouth to argue, but a muffled crash from the corridor silenced him. Silas immediately killed the holographic display and drew a sawed-off pulse shotgun from beneath the table. "Stay quiet," Silas hissed. Through the reinforced door, the sound of shouting drifted in. It wasn't the sound of an arrest. It was a brawl. Kalen crept to the door and looked through the narrow viewing slit. In the corridor, a group of station toughs had cornered a young Draconite male, a V2 model used for heavy labor. He was cowering against the wall while the men laughed, poking him with electrified cattle prods. "Look at the green skin," one of the men sneered, his voice thick with cheap synthetic ale. "Thinks he can just walk the gantries like a real person. You're just a walking pile of scrap metal, boy." The Draconite didn't fight back. His neural shackle was visible, pulsing a bright, obedience-inducing blue. He was a weapon that had been taught to be a victim. Kalen felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Tala. She was looking through the slit, her golden eyes burning with a rage so intense it seemed to heat the air around them. "He is one of mine," she whispered, "and they are treating him like a broken droid." "Tala, don't," Kalen warned. "If you go out there, you blow our cover. We're dead if they see you." She turned to him, and the look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated judgment. "You talk about freedom, Kalen Voss. You talk about humanity, but you watch while your kind breaks mine because it is safe. Is that the lesson you want me to learn? That being free means being a coward?" Kalen froze. The humanistic theme he had been trying to embrace, the idea that every life had intrinsic value, was suddenly staring him in the face, demanding a price he wasn't sure he could pay. He looked at the cowering Draconite in the hall, and then he looked at the kinetic pistol in his hand. "If we do this, there's no going back," he said. "There was never a going back," she replied. Kalen looked at Silas. "How fast can you prep the streak for a hot start?" 2 minutes, Silas grunted, his red eye glowing. "But you're going to owe me a lot more than a drink after this." Kalen nodded. He turned back to the door and took a deep breath. He wasn't a hero. He was a data runner with a bad conscience and a ship that was too slow. But as he looked at Tala, he realized that some things were worth dying for, even if the math didn't add up. "Let's go," he said. He kicked the door release. The hallway was a blur of motion and neon. Kalen didn't wait for a conversation. He fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the crack of the kinetic round echoing like a thunderclap in the narrow space. The thugs jumped back, their eyes wide with surprise as they looked from Kalen to the hooded giant emerging from the workshop behind him. "Let him go," Kalen growled, his pistol leveled at the leader's chest. The leader, a man with a cybernetic jaw and a greasy vest, let out a nervous laugh. "You're sticking your neck out for a piece of property, Spacer. This thing doesn't even have a soul." "He has more of a soul than you ever will, meatbag," Kalen snapped. "Now walk away before I decide to see if that jaw of yours is blast-proof." The thugs looked at each other, then at the sheer size of Tala as she stepped into the light, shedding her poncho. The sight of a V3 Draconite in full combat posture was enough to turn the bravest man's blood to ice. They didn't argue. They turned and ran, disappearing into the maze of the station. The young Draconite looked up, his blue eyes wide with terror and confusion. He looked at Tala, then at Kalen, his body still trembling from the cattle prod shocks. "Run," Tala said, her voice a low command. "Go to the lower levels. Hide in the heat vents. Do not let them see you again." The male didn't say a word. He just nodded and bolted, disappearing into the shadows. Tala turned to Kalen. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Kalen replied, glancing at his comms link. "The whole station knows we're here now. We need to bug out before security locks down the bay." They sprinted back toward Hangar Bay 42, their boots pounding against the metal grating. But as they neared the streak, the air suddenly grew cold. A strange silence fell over the hangar, the kind of silence that precedes a predator's strike. Standing at the base of the ship's ramp was a figure that made the station thugs look like children. He was tall, dressed in a suit of matte black tactical armor that seemed to swallow the light. A necklace of teeth hung around his neck, and in his hand he held a heavy disruptor rifle. "Vaccin Draken," Tala whispered, her body coiling like a spring. The collector didn't move. He just watched them with eyes that were as cold and empty as the void itself. 80,000 credits, Voss," Vaccin said, his voice a smooth, terrifying purr. "That's a lot of money for a man who lives on the crumbs of the Reach. I was curious why a bottom-tier runner would buy a high-value asset like Magra." "Her name is Tala," Kalen said, his hand tightening on his pistol. Vaccin smiled, a slow, predatory movement. "Names are for things that are alive, Voss. To Gentech, she is an investment, and to me, she is a bounty that will set me up for life. I don't want to kill you, Data Runner. You're a talented ghost. Just hand over the asset and I'll let you crawl back into whatever hole you came from." Kalen felt the sweat rolling down his back. He looked at the disruptor rifle, then at the obsidian streak, then at Tala. Every instinct he had, every year of survival training, told him to take the deal. He could buy another ship. He could start over. He could live. But then he remembered the smell of the slave market. He remembered the look in the young Draconite's eyes. And he remembered the promise he had made to himself when he looked in that cracked mirror. "Not today, Vaccin," Kalen said. The collector sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. "I was hoping you'd be smarter than that." Vaccin raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a massive explosion rocked the hangar. A section of the ceiling collapsed, raining debris down on the landing pad. Through the smoke, Silas's voice boomed over the station's intercom. "I told you I'd help you with a hot start, Voss. Now get your asses on that ship before I blow the atmospheric shields." The hangar's emergency sirens began to wail, and the massive blast doors at the far end of the bay started to cycle shut. "Tala!" Kalen yelled, diving behind a stack of shipping crates as Vaccin opened fire. The disruptor bolts hissed through the air, turning the metal crates into molten slag. Tala didn't hide. She moved with a speed that defied her size, using the falling debris as cover. She picked up a heavy piece of I-beam and hurled it at Vaccin with the force of a catapult. The collector rolled out of the way, but the distraction gave Kalen the window he needed. He fired a volley of kinetic rounds at the fuel lines overhead. The pipes burst, spraying highly flammable coolant into the path of Vaccin's disruptor fire. The resulting fireball was blinding. Kalen didn't wait to see the results. He grabbed Tala's hand, and they scrambled up the ramp of the obsidian streak. "Punch it!" Kalen screamed as he vaulted into the pilot's seat. The ship's engines roared to life, a desperate, screaming protest of power. The streak lurched forward, its landing struts screaming as they scraped against the floor. The hangar's blast doors were closing, a narrow slit of stars remaining between the massive plates of steel. Kalen jammed the thrusters to maximum. The ship groaned, the inertial dampeners struggling to keep up as they shot through the closing gap. For a heartbeat, the wingtips sparked against the metal, and then they were through, punching into the cold, silent freedom of the vacuum. Behind them, the Scylla relay station was a beehive of activity, but Kalen didn't look back. He set the coordinates for the Scylla belt, his hands shaking as he fought to stabilize the ship. Once they were safely in the shadow of a large asteroid, Kalen slumped in his seat. He was covered in soot, his lungs burned from the smoke, and his heart felt like it was trying to escape his chest. Tala sat in the co-pilot's seat, her golden eyes fixed on him. She reached out and touched the bruise forming on his neck, where Vaxon's bolt had grazed him. "You fought for me," she said. Kalen looked at her. "I fought for us, Tala. There's a difference." He realized then that the turning point wasn't just about escaping a hunter. It was about the moment he stopped thinking about his own survival and started thinking about what was right. He had lost his savings, his safety, and his anonymity. He was a fugitive now, hunted by the most dangerous man in the sector and a multi-billion-mark corporation. But as he looked at the stars, he didn't feel afraid. For the first time in 12 years, he felt clean. "We need to talk about the Omega Code," Kalen said, his voice quiet. "Silas said we need the encryption key from Gentech Prime." "That is suicide," she said. "Probably," Kalen agreed. "But so was buying you, and so was shooting at Vaxon Draken. I'm starting to get a taste for it." Tala looked at the console, her fingers tracing the controls. "You are a very strange human, Kalen Voss." "Yeah, well, the normal ones aren't exactly doing us any favors," he replied. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He knew the cost of his choices. He knew that from this point on, every breath they took was a stolen one. He knew that the humanity he had embraced was a fragile thing, easily crushed by the weight of a disruptor bolt or a corporate ledger. But as the obsidian streak drifted through the silent belt, Kalen realized that he had finally found his purpose. He wasn't just a data runner anymore. He was the guardian of a secret that could change the galaxy. And he was the partner of a woman who had taught him that the most important thing you can ever buy is the ability to look yourself in the eye. Silas's warning echoed in his mind. "You're going to owe me a lot more than a drink." Kalen smiled. It was a debt he was more than willing to pay. "Tala," he said, opening his eyes, "can you feel the beacon? Is it still silent?" She closed her eyes, focusing on the dark partition in her mind. "It is quiet," she whispered, "for now. But I can feel it, listening. It knows we are here. Then we'll just have to make sure we're somewhere else before it speaks," Kalen said. He engaged the sublight engines and steered the ship deeper into the asteroid field. They were alone in the dark, two fugitives with a dying ship and a burning secret. But as the lights of the Scylla relay faded into the distance, Kalen knew they were finally on the right path. The journey to Gentech Prime would be 2,000 light-years of hell. But as long as Tala was with him, Kalen Voss was ready to walk through every single mile of it. The descent into the atmosphere of Valonus Prime was unlike any entry Kalen Voss had ever executed. Usually his arrivals were marked by the sterile hum of orbital stations or the jagged, airless landscapes of mining rocks. Here the view screen was swallowed by an ocean of swaying, bioluminescent amber. Valonus was an agricultural powerhouse, a world where the soil was enriched by ancient volcanic ash, and the flora had been genetically nudged to glow softly during the long, violet nights. To the corporate overlords, it was merely a factory for high-calorie grain. To the fugitives aboard the Obsidian Streak, it was a sanctuary of living color. The ship groaned as it settled onto a concealed landing pad nestled deep within a canyon of giant, crystalline wheat. Kalen cut the engines, and for the first time in weeks, the silence was not the heavy, oppressive quiet of the void. It was filled with the rhythmic chirping of synthetic insects and the distant, low-frequency song of the wind rushing through the stalks. Tala stood by the airlock, her hand hovering inches from the release seal. She looked at Kalen, her golden eyes wide with a trepidation he hadn't seen even when facing Vaxon Draken's disruptor rifle. "Is the air safe?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kalen checked the atmospheric sensors on his wrist-mounted deck. High oxygen, perfect nitrogen balance, and enough pollen to make a scout bot sneeze. "It's more than safe, Tala. It's what we were designed to breathe before we started living in metal cans." The airlock cycled open, and the scent hit them instantly. It was the smell of damp earth, of growth, and of rain that had fallen 3 hours ago. It was an olfactory overload for someone who had spent her entire life in sterile labs, war-torn trenches, or slave cages. Tala stepped onto the ramp, her boots clicking softly against the metal. She walked down into the tall grass, her massive frame disappearing into the amber glow. She stopped, reaching out with a trembling hand to touch a stalk of wheat. Her fingers, which Kaelin had seen crush reinforced steel, brushed the grain with the reverence of someone touching a holy relic. "It is soft," she murmured, "like the fabric you gave me, but alive." Kaelin followed her down, feeling the soft soil give way beneath his boots. "We need to find the collective," he said, though he hated to break the moment. "Silas gave me the coordinates for a group of refurbished workers. They run a repair hub in the middle of these fields. If anyone has seen a Gen-Tech encryption key or knows someone who has, it's them." They walked for 2 kilometers through the glowing forest of grain. The wheat stood nearly 3 meters tall, providing a perfect canopy that hid them from orbital surveillance. As they moved, Kaelin noticed a subtle shift in the environment. The wild wheat gave way to organized rows, and the sound of mechanical harvesters began to thrum in the distance. They emerged into a clearing where a series of modular habitats were clustered around a central well. A group of workers were gathered there, their skin a patchwork of natural flesh and synthetic grafts. Some had hydraulic arms designed for heavy lifting. Others had optical implants for precision sorting. Among them were several draconites, their green skins scarred and weathered, but they wore no shackles. They were working alongside the humans, sharing water and conversation in a way Kaelin had never seen in the core systems. "Wait here," Kaelin whispered to Tala, sensing the immediate tension in the clearing. He stepped forward, his hands empty and held away from his sides. "I'm looking for Alara," he called out. "Silas sent me." A woman with a prosthetic leg and a face etched with the lines of 70 years of hard labor stood up from a bench. She wiped her hands on a grease-stained apron and squinted at him. "Silas doesn't send people unless they're in deep," she said. "And he never sends humans who look like they've spent too much time behind a desk." "I'm a runner," Kaelin said, his voice steady. "And I'm not alone." He beckoned to the shadows and Tala stepped out. The clearing went silent. The workers froze, their eyes fixed on the emerald giant. One of the Draconite laborers, a V2 model with a missing tusk, dropped the crate he was carrying. "A V3, he whispered, his voice full of awe and fear. "An alpha." "She is not an alpha," Kaelin said, stepping between the crowd and Tala. "Her name is Tala, and she's the reason we're here. We need help. We're being hunted by a void stalker." Ilara's eyes narrowed as she looked at the scars on Tala's neck. "You took her shackle off. That's a death sentence for anyone within 5 light years of this planet." "The price of freedom is always a bit high," Kaelin replied, using the street slang he'd picked up in the lower levels. "But we're not here to bring trouble. We're looking for a way to break a Gen-Tech encryption, a specific key." Ilara sighed, her mechanical leg whirring as she walked toward them. "Follow me. If the collector's on your tail, we don't have much time to be standing in the open." She led them into a subterranean workshop buried beneath the main habitat. The room was cool and smelled of mint and machine oil. Tables were covered in disassembled harvester parts and modified data pads. "You're not the first to come looking for a way out," Ilara said, gesturing for them to sit. "We've been building this collective for 15 years. Most of us are assets that were written off as scrap. We fixed each other. We learned that a man with a metal arm is still a man, and a Draconite with a mind is still a person." She turned to Tala. "You feel it, don't you? The hum in your head?" Tala nodded slowly. "It is getting louder. Since we landed, it feels like a drum beating against my skull." "That's the planetary relay," Ilara explained. "Gen-Tech has a station on the dark side of the moon. It pings every biological asset on the surface twice a day. Your partition is reacting to the pulse. It's trying to wake up." "Can you stop it?" Kaelin asked. "I can dampen it for a few days," Ilara said. "But the key you're looking for, that's not just code. It's a physical token, a master drive that contains the biometric signatures of the original Gen-Tech founders. There's only one on the planet, and it's kept in the Overseer's Spire in the capital city, 300 kilometers from here." Kaelin leaned back, the weight of the task settling on his shoulders. He looked at Tala, who was watching a small green lizard crawl across the floor. She looked so peaceful, so far removed from the weapon she was designed to be. He realized then that he wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. He was fighting for this, For a world where a warrior could watch a lizard and a data runner could breathe air that didn't taste like copper. Why are you doing this, runner? Elara asked suddenly, her eyes piercing. You're a human. You could have sold her for enough credits to buy a moon. You could be sipping synthetic wine on a pleasure cruiser right now. Kalen looked at his hands, scarred and calloused from years of hauling crates and dodging customs. I spent 34 years looking away, he said. I thought that if I didn't see the cages, they weren't there. But once you see them, once you see the person inside, you can't unsee it. I'm not a hero, Elara. I'm just a man who's tired of being a coward. Elara smiled, a slow, sad movement of her lips. Sometimes that's the same thing. A sudden sharp vibration shook the floor. It wasn't the rhythmic thrum of a harvester. It was a rhythmic, high-frequency pulse that made the lights in the workshop flicker. Tala clutched her head, let out a low, guttural growl of pain. It is calling, she gasped. The beacon. It's active. Elara turned to a monitor on the wall, her face turning pale. The relay is jumping frequencies. They're not just pinging, they've locked onto a specific signature. Kalen stood up, his hand going to his pistol. How? We were in the canyon. The wheat should have masked us. Elara looked at him, her red optical sensor whirring with frantic speed. They didn't find her, boss. They found the ship. The Obsidian Streak has a transponder that just went live. Kalen's heart stopped. He hadn't touched the transponder. He had stripped it himself back in the Syllabelt. Vaxen Draken, Kalen whispered. He didn't follow us. He just waited for us to land and triggered a remote override. He turned to the door, but it was too late. From above, the sound of screaming engines tore through the peaceful night of Velonis Prime. A shadow fell over the clearing, a jagged black shape that blocked out the bioluminescent glow of the wheat. The Void Stalker had arrived. The air in the clearing, once filled with the scent of earth and growth, was suddenly choked by the smell of burning ozone and high-grade starship fuel. The Void Stalker hung in the sky like a predatory insect, its landing thrusters scorching the amber wheat into blackened husks. Vaxen Draken was not playing games anymore. He hadn't landed in the canyon. He had dropped directly into the heart of the settlement. Kalen bolted up the stairs from the workshop, Tala right behind him. They emerged into a scene of absolute chaos. The refurbished workers were scattering, their mechanical limbs whirring as they tried to reach the safety of the grain. The Draconite laborers stood their ground, forming a defensive line in front of the habitats, but they were unarmed, facing a ship that could glass a city block in seconds. The ramp of the Void Stalker lowered with a clinical hiss-click sound. Vaxen Draken stepped out, his disruptor rifle held casually across his chest. Behind him, 4 Gentech enforcers in sleek white polymer armor followed, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. Kalen Voss! Vaxen's voice was amplified by his helmet's external speakers, booming across the clearing. You've caused quite a bit of paperwork for a man of my standing. I think it's time we settled the bill. Kalen stepped into the light, his kinetic pistol held low. Leave these people out of it, Vaxen. They have nothing to do with this. Vaxen tilted his head, the teeth on his necklace rattling softly. They gave sanctuary to a stolen asset. In the eyes of the law, they are accomplices to grand larceny. But I'm a reasonable man. Hand over the V3, and I might forget to report this little commune to the planetary authorities. Tala stepped forward, her hood falling back to reveal her burning golden eyes. She looked at the workers, at the children of the modded families hiding behind the well, and then at the enforcers. Kalen could see the muscles in her arms coiling, her carbon-weaved skin shimmering under the harsh floodlights of the interceptor. Do not do it, Tala, Kalen said, his voice tight. I will not let them die for me, Kalen, she replied, her voice a low, resonant rumble. This is my cage. I will not let it swallow them too. She started to walk toward Vaxen, her steps heavy and deliberate. The enforcers raised their rifles, the muzzles glowing with a faint blue light. Wait, Kalen yelled, his mind racing. He looked at Vaxen, then at the workers. He knew the cost of what he was about to do. He knew that once he spoke these words, the life he had built, the anonymity he had cherished, would be incinerated forever. Vaxen, you're looking for the Omega code, right? Kalen shouted. The collector paused, his finger hovering over the trigger. That is the objective, yes. You think you can just take her and extract it? Kalen laughed, a harsh, desperate sound. I was a Union logistics officer, Vaxon. I know how that partition works. It's a biometric lock. If she's under duress, if her heart rate exceeds 200 beats per minute, the code wipes itself. You'll have a dead Draconite and a very angry employer? Vaxon's grip on the rifle tightened. You're bluffing, data runner. Am I? Kalen took a step forward, putting himself directly between Tala and the enforcers. Look at her. She's already peeking. You fire one shot, you lose everything. But I have a copy. The silence that followed was absolute. Tala looked at him, her expression one of pure confusion. She knew he didn't have a copy. He knew he didn't have a copy. But Vaxon Draken was a hunter, and a hunter's greatest weakness was the fear of losing the kill. You're lying, Vaxon said, but there was a flicker of doubt in his cold eyes. I shunted the data in Silas's shop, Kalen lied, his voice growing more confident with every word. Why do you think he helped us? I promised him a cut of the master key. I have the encryption headers on my deck right now. You kill me. You kill the only man who can unlock her without turning her brain into a slurry. Vaxon lowered his rifle a fraction of an inch. What do you want, Voss? Safe passage for the collective, Kalen said. You let them go. You let them disappear into the fields, and I'll give you the headers. We can settle the rest at the capital. Kalen? No, Tala whispered, grabbing his shoulder. Trust me, he said, looking back at her. He tried to put every ounce of the humanity he had found into that single gaze. He wanted her to see that he wasn't just saving her. He was choosing to be the man she deserved. Vaxon looked at the workers, then back at Kalen. Fine. They have 5 minutes to bug out. After that, anyone left in this clearing is target practice. Ilara stepped forward, her mechanical leg clicking. We're not leaving you, boy. Go, Ilara, Kalen said, his eyes never leaving Vaxon. Take your people. Get to the lower canyons. I'll find you. The workers hesitated, but Ilara saw the resolve in Kalen's face. She nodded slowly, and with a series of quiet commands, she led the collective into the shadows of the tall, glowing wheat. Within minutes, the clearing was empty, save for Kalen, Tala, and the hunters. Now, Vaxon said, stepping forward, give me the deck. Kalen pulled his data deck from his belt. He held it out, but as Vaxon reached for it, Kalen didn't hand it over. He dropped it to the ground and crushed it under his boot. The deck shattered into 1,000 pieces of plastic and silicon. Vaxon's face went purple with rage. You void-blasted fool! You just destroyed the only leverage you had. I didn't have the code, Vaxon, Kalen said, a grim smile touching his lips. I just needed you to stop shooting for 5 minutes. Vaxon roared in fury and raised his rifle, but he was too slow. Tala had been waiting for the signal. She lunged forward, her massive body a blur of emerald motion. She hit the lead enforcer like a freight train, the impact of her shoulder shattering his armor and sending him flying 50 meters across the clearing. Kalen dived for cover behind the well, his kinetic pistol barking as he laid down suppressive fire. The remaining enforcers scrambled for cover, their blue disruptor bolts lighting up the night like a neon nightmare. The battle for Veloni's Prime had begun, and it was a symphony of violence and desperation. Tala was a force of nature. She didn't use a gun, she used the environment. She ripped a heavy harvester blade from its mount and swung it like a two-handed sword, the sharpened steel whistling through the air. She moved with a lethal grace, a warrior who had finally remembered that her strength wasn't a curse, it was a shield. Vaxon Draken, however, was a professional. He stayed back, his eyes tracking Tala's movements. He waited for her to overextend, for the moment when she would be vulnerable. Kalen saw him aiming. He saw the red targeting laser settle on Tala's back. No, Kalen screamed. He didn't think. He didn't calculate the odds. He threw himself out of cover, firing his pistol as fast as he could pull the trigger. He wasn't aiming to kill Vaxon. He was aiming to disrupt his focus. Vaxon shifted his aim at the last second, the disruptor bolt catching Kalen in the shoulder. The force of the blast spun him around and slammed him into the stone wall of the well. The world went white, a searing pain exploding in his chest. Kalen! Tala's roar echoed across the clearing, a sound of such pure, undiluted agony that it made even Vaxen flinch. She turned away from the enforcers, her golden eyes fixed on Kalen's fallen form. The Omega partition in her mind, the one Silas had said was a bomb, suddenly flared with a blinding white light. But it wasn't a kill signal, it was a release. Tala didn't collapse. She didn't die. She stood in the center of the clearing, her body vibrating with a power that seemed to pull the bioluminescence from the wheat around her. The air crackled with static, and the electronic systems of the Void Stalker began to spark and fail. The Omega code wasn't a kill switch, Kalen realized through the haze of pain. It was a surge, a way to bypass every neural limiter ever placed on a Draconite. Tala raised her hands and a wave of electromagnetic energy pulsed outward. The Enforcer's armor short-circuited, locking their joints and leaving them paralyzed. Vaxen's rifle exploded in his hands, the high-capacity battery unable to handle the surge. The Collector stood there, his hands scorched, his eyes wide with a terror he had never known. He looked at Tala, who stood like a vengeful goddess in the amber glow. "You! What are you?" he gasped. "I am free," she said. She stepped toward him, her hand closing around his throat. She lifted him off the ground as if he were a rag doll. She could have crushed his windpipe in a second. She could have ended the hunt forever. "Tala!" "Stop!" Kalen's voice was weak, barely a rasp. She paused, her fingers tightening. "He tried to kill you, Kalen. He tried to take everything. Don't be what he says you are," Kalen whispered, his vision fading at the edges. "Be better." Tala looked at the man in her grasp, a pathetic, broken hunter who lived only for the kill. Then she looked at Kalen, the man who had traded his life for a choice. Slowly, she opened her hand. Vaxen dropped to the dirt, coughing and gasping for air. "Get on your ship," she said, her voice like grinding stone. "And if I ever see you again, I will not listen to the human." Vaxen didn't wait. He scrambled toward the Void Stalker, which was flickering back to life. He and his paralyzed enforcers retreated into the black ship, and within seconds the Interceptor was screaming back into the sky, fleeing the monster it had sought to capture. Tala ran to Kalen, her massive hands shaking as she pulled him into her lap. "Kalen, stay with me. The workers, Ilera, they are coming back." Kalen looked up at her, a small, bloody smile on his face. "Did we win?" "We survived," she said, a single tear of molten gold rolling down her green cheek. "We survived because of you." Kalen felt the darkness closing in, but for the first time, it didn't feel cold. It felt like the soft amber wheat of Velana's prime. He had made his choice. He had stood between the hunter and the hunted, and in doing so, he had finally found his own freedom. "I told you. I was tired of being a coward," he whispered. He closed his eyes, the sound of the wind through the grain, singing him to sleep. He was a data runner who had lost everything, but as he felt Tala's hand on his chest, he knew he had finally found something that credits could never buy. He had found his soul. The world returned to Kalen Voss in fragments of amber and pain. He felt the soft, rhythmic compression of a medical droid's rhythmic pumping against his chest and the sharp, antiseptic smell of high-grade biogel. When he finally forced his eyes open, the violet night of Velonis Prime had settled over the fields. The glowing wheat was no longer a forest of fire, but a sea of tranquil, pulsing light. He was back in Alara's subterranean workshop, the ceiling echoing with the distant muffled sounds of the collective returning to their lives. "Don't try to sit up," a voice commanded. It was Ilara. She was hovering over him, her mechanical leg clicking as she adjusted a series of IV drips. "That disruptor bolt did a number on your lung, boss. If it weren't for the fact that Draken's rifle was shorting out when he pulled the trigger, you'd be a memory right now." "Where is she?" Kalen rasped, his throat feeling like he'd swallowed a handful of dry sand. "She's outside," Ilara said, her red optical sensor softening. "She hasn't left the entrance since we brought you down." "She's different, Kalen. Whatever happened out there, whatever surge she unleashed, it changed something in her architecture." Kalen closed his eyes, remembering the white light that had radiated from Tala. "It wasn't a weapon," he whispered. "It was a bridge." He stayed in the medbay for 2 more days, his body knitting itself back together with the help of the collective's scavenge tech. During that time, the workers came to visit him in small groups. They didn't come with credits or demands. They brought small gifts, a handful of nutrient-rich berries, a polished stone from the canyon floor, a carved wooden trinket. They looked at him not as a data runner or a spacer, but as a man who had stood his ground when the hunters came. The Draconite laborer with the missing tusk, the one who had first recognized Tala as an alpha, sat by Kalen's bed on the second evening. He didn't speak for a long time, his large green hands resting on his knees. "You are a small man," the Draconite said finally, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "But your shadow is very long. In the pits, we were told that humans were made of glass and greed. We were told that your only strength was the buttons you pushed to make us bleed." "I used to believe that too," Kalen said, looking at the ceiling. "I thought strength was about who had the most credits and the fastest ship." The Draconite nodded slowly. "You stood between her and the fire. You had no shackle on your neck, no command in your head. You simply chose. That is a kind of power we were never taught to understand." On the third morning, Kalen finally managed to walk. He moved slowly, his shoulder bound in a pressurized cast, and climbed the stairs to the surface. He found Tala standing at the edge of the clearing, watching the sun rise over the amber fields. The sky was a pale lavender, and the air was cool and crisp. She didn't turn around, but her shoulders dropped an inch when she felt his presence. "I heard your heart rate stabilize 4 hours ago," she said. "You were listening?" Kalen asked, leaning against a storage crate. "I can hear everything now, Kalen. The humming of the station on the moon, the data streams passing through the satellites, the rhythmic pulse of the life support systems in the habitats. The Omega surge. It didn't just break my limiters. It integrated me." She turned to him, and her golden eyes were no longer embers. They were twin stars, clear and brilliant. The gray hue was gone from her skin, replaced by a vibrant, deep emerald. She looked powerful, but more importantly, she looked at peace. "Vaccine is gone," she said. "He retreated to the orbital station to repair his ship, but he will report what he saw. Gentech will not ignore an alpha unit that can weaponize electromagnetic fields." "I know," Kalen said. "We cannot stay here, Kalen. If we stay, they will burn this world just to find us. Ilara and her people deserve better than to be collateral damage in a corporate war." Kalen looked at the settlement, at the people who had built a life out of the scraps of a heartless galaxy. He realized that the humanistic lesson he had been learning, that we are all responsible for the pieces of the world we touch, was no longer a theory. It was an obligation. "Then we finish it," Kalen said. "Silas said the only way to stop the signal is the encryption key in the Overseer's spire. We don't run for the outer rim, Tala. We go to the capital. The spire is guarded by a battalion of enforcers and a triple-layered security grid," she said, her voice neutral. Kalen reached into his pocket and pulled out his bruised, cracked data deck. It was the one he had crushed under his boot to trick Vaxon, but he had spent the last night in the med bay soldering the internal components back together. "I'm a data runner, remember? I've spent my life breaking into places I don't belong. And you? Well, you're an alpha who can talk to machines. I'd say the odds are almost even." Tala looked at the deck, then at him. She reached out and touched his hand, her fingers warm and solid. "Why, Kalen? We could take the streak and vanish into the deep void. We could find a moon where nobody knows our names. Because if we just run, we're still in a cage," he said softly. "The bars are just further apart. I want a world where I don't have to buy a person to save them. And I think you want a world where you don't have to be a weapon to be free." She was silent for a long moment, the wind through the wheat the only sound between them. Then she nodded. "We go to the spire," she said. That afternoon, they prepared the obsidian streak. Ilara provided them with extra fuel and a crate of specialized EMP grenades the collective had developed for disabling rogue harvesters. As they loaded the last of the supplies, Ilara pulled Kalen aside. "You're a fool, Voss," she said, but she was smiling. "A brave, stupid fool." "It's a growth industry," he replied, checking the seals on the ship's airlock. "Take care of her," Ilara said, looking at Tala. "She isn't just a warrior anymore. She's the beginning of something new." "I think she's the one taking care of me," Kalen admitted. They boarded the ship and taxied onto the hidden landing pad. As the engines roared to life, Kalen looked out at the glowing fields one last time. He saw the workers gathered at the edge of the clearing, waving. He saw the Draconite laborer raise a fist in a gesture of solidarity. He realized then that he wasn't just fighting for Tala. He was fighting for every person who had ever been told they were an asset, a tool, or a mistake. He was fighting for the right to be human in a universe that only understood the value of credits. "We're hot," Tala said from the co-pilot's seat. Kalen gripped the controls, the familiar vibration of the ship feeling like a second skin. "Set a course for the capital," he said. "Let's go see the overseer." The obsidian streak lifted off, cutting through the violet sky like a silver needle. They were headed for the heart of the enemy, into a fortress of steel and glass. But as Kalen looked at the woman beside him, he didn't feel afraid. He felt like he had finally, after 34 years of drifting, found his destination. The capital city of Valanus Prime, Nexara, was a sprawling monolith of white marble and reinforced polymer, a testament to the wealth that agricultural exploitation could provide. At its center stood the Overseer's Spire, a needle-thin tower that pierced the clouds, glowing with the sterile, blue light of the corporate elite. To the citizens below, it was a beacon of order. To Kalen and Tala, it was the ultimate cage. The obsidian streak approached the city under a cloak of darkness, its engines dampened to a whisper. Kalen guided the ship into the lower-level maintenance tunnels, a labyrinth of pipes and exhaust vents that serviced the Spire's massive cooling systems. "We have 3 minutes before the automated scanners detect the heat signature of the engines," Kalen said, his fingers dancing across the console. "I am already in the grid," Tala replied. Her eyes were closed, and a faint emerald glow emanated from the base of her skull. "The internal sensors are blinded. They see a routine maintenance drone, not a freighter." They docked in a secluded service bay on the 40th floor. The air was thick with the hum of servers and the smell of ozone. They stepped off the ship, Kalen with his kinetic pistol drawn, and Tala moving with the predatory grace of a hunter who had finally found her mark. "The security grid is a decentralized weave," Tala whispered, her voice echoing in the metallic hallway. "I can suppress the local alarms, but the central core will notice the drain. We must be fast." They moved through the corridors, a ghost and a giant navigating the heart of the beast. They encountered a patrol of 4 enforcers near the elevator bank. Kalen prepared to fire, but Tala moved first. She didn't use a blade or her fists. She simply reached out into the air. A pulse of invisible energy rippled from her hands, and the enforcers' helmets sparked. They collapsed instantly. Their neural links temporarily scrambled. "Do not kill them," Kalen whispered. "I am not a monster, Kalen," she replied, her voice soft but firm. They reached the spire's apex, a circular room with walls of transparent plasteel that offered a panoramic view of the glowing city below. In the center of the room sat the overseer, a man named Thorn, who looked more like an accountant than a tyrant. He sat behind a desk of polished mahogany, his fingers tapping rhythmically on a glass interface. He didn't look up when they entered. "I must admit, Voss, your persistence is quite remarkable. Most runners would have been halfway to the Andromeda sector by now." "I'm a slow learner," Kalen said, leveling his pistol at Thorn's chest. Thorn looked up then, his eyes cold and clinical. "And the V3, or should I say, the Omega. Do you have any idea how much research was invested in your neural architecture? You are a billion-credit asset, and you are currently trespassing on private property." "I am not property," Tala said, her voice a low, terrifying rumble that made the glass walls vibrate. Thorn sighed, leaning back in his chair. "The law says otherwise, and on this planet, I am the law." He reached for a red button on his desk, but before he could touch it, the lights in the room flared a brilliant green. The interface on his desk shattered, and the holographic displays around the room flickered and died. "Your law is built on a lie," Tala said, her eyes burning with golden fire. "It is built on the belief that you can own the soul of another being. I have seen the code, Thorn. I have seen the vault where you keep the lives of 10,000 of my kind." Kalen stepped forward, holding out his data deck. "We're not here for credits, Thorn. We're here for the encryption key, the master drive." Thorn laughed, a hollow, dry sound. "You think you can just take it? Even if you kill me, the vault is protected by a biometric deadman switch. If my heart stops, the drive is incinerated. I don't need you to die, Kalen said, a grim smile touching his lips. I just need you to be irrelevant. He looked at Tala. Now. Tala stepped toward the central server pillar, a massive column of glowing fiber optics. She placed her hands on the glass, her emerald skin shimmering. She wasn't trying to break the lock. She was becoming part of it. The Omega Surge flowed from her into the tower, a river of raw data and intent. Kalen watched the monitors as they began to scroll at light speed. He saw the ownership records of every Draconite on the planet. He saw the kill switch protocols, the neural dampening schedules, the genetic blueprints. He saw the entirety of Gentech's dark empire laid bare. "What are you doing?" Thorne screamed, scrambling back from his desk. "You'll crash the entire planetary network." "I am not crashing it," Tala said, her voice sounding as if it were coming from the tower itself. "I am liberating it." Kalen's fingers flew across his deck, catching the fragments of the encryption key as Tala tore them from the server. He felt the weight of the data, the sheer magnitude of the lives it represented. For 34 years, he had moved small secrets for small men. Now he was holding the freedom of an entire race. "There!" Kalen yelled. "I have the master header." Tala pulled her hands away from the pillar, and the green light faded. The room fell into a sudden, heavy silence. Thorne slumped in his chair, his face pale and defeated. "It's done," Kalen said. "The signal is dead. The beacons are silent, and every Draconite on Velanus Prime just had their ownership papers deleted from the central registry." Thorne looked at them, his voice trembling. "You've destroyed us. Gentech will send a fleet. They will hunt you to the ends of the universe." "Let them come," Tala said, looking out at the city. "They will find that a world of free people is much harder to conquer than a world of slaves." They left Thorne in his tower, a king of nothing, and made their way back to the Obsidian Streak. As they lifted off and cleared the city's airspace, Kalen looked at the readout on his console. The signal that had been a drumbeat in Tala's head was gone. The partition in her mind was still there, but it was no longer a vault. It was a library, a source of strength rather than a source of fear. They flew into the dawn, the sun rising over the amber fields of Velanus Prime. For the first time, they weren't running toward a hidden moon or a secret relay. They were just flying. Kalen leaned back in his seat, feeling the ache in his shoulder and the exhaustion in his bones. He looked at his reflection in the cracked viewport. He saw the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, and the scars on his skin. But for the first time in his life, he didn't want to look away. "I used to think my life was measured in the weight of credits in my pocket and the distance between me and my last mistake. I was a man of shadows, a ghost moving through a galaxy of steel and indifference. I thought that by staying invisible, I was staying safe. But standing here, watching the violet light of the shackles die across the horizon, I realized I was never really living. I was just surviving in a cage of my own making, a cage built from the fear of being seen, of being responsible for another soul. For 34 years, I looked at people and saw assets, saw obstacles, or saw nothing at all. I thought empathy was a luxury for those who didn't have to worry about their next meal. How wrong I was. It was only when I spent every cent I had on a woman the world called a monster that I finally saw a human being in the mirror. I traded a quiet retirement for a life of noise and danger. And yet, for the first time, my soul feels at peace. We are all bound by something, whether it is blood, law, or fear. But we are also bound by the choices we make when no one is looking. I chose to see her. I chose to stay. And in doing so, I finally found my way home. He felt a hand on his shoulder. Tala was looking at him, the golden light of the sun reflecting in her eyes. "What do we do now, Kalen?" she asked. Kalen looked at the stars, billions of lights burning in the endless dark. "Now? Now we see what else we can fix." He engaged the jump drive, but this time, he didn't set a course for the Syllabelt. He set a course for the nearest hub of the Synaptic Union. He had a data deck full of evidence and a story that the galaxy needed to hear. As the Obsidian Streak punched into hyperspace, the blue and white light swallowed them once more. But they weren't ghosts anymore. They were a man and a woman, a pilot and a warrior, two souls who had decided that the world didn't have to be a cage. We all have that moment where we see someone the world has already judged, someone tucked away in a cage of prejudice or a label that makes them less than us. I wonder, have you ever looked past the skin, the scars, or the story others told you to find the person underneath? What would happen if you stopped looking at what they were and started seeing who they are? Kalen Voss took a deep breath of the recycled air, which for the first time tasted exactly like freedom. He reached out and adjusted the throttle, his small human hand resting alongside the large green hand of the woman who had saved him. The ship streaked toward the future, a single stubborn light in the infinite dark.